Hello everyone. Yeah, hi, I'm Rohan Kapoor. I'm currently working as a cloud DevOps engineer. Today we will be talking about Anthos. Okay, what Anthos is, why we want to use Anthos, what was the need of bringing Anthos as a service in use of Kubernetes. Okay, so Anthos is a Greek word which means flower, and flower grows on premises, and from cloud we need rain. So this is how they build this. Okay, so Anthos let us build and manage modern and multi-cloud application. When I say modern multi-cloud application, that means taking an example of, suppose, online shopping site. Okay, online shopping. In online shopping site, in front end we have a web server, and we have a site, we have a component for men's clothes. For men's we have accessories, and we have a payment gateway for transactions. Okay, now making this, considering this all as a microservice. Suppose for web server we have a microservice. For men's, like taking these two services together, suppose these are the two microservices we have. We have a microservice for payment. Okay, so now the concern here is, suppose due to the client requirement, for the security point of view, if we want to have this microservice running on some of our cluster, now we want to have this cluster on our on premises rather than having this on code on cloud. Suppose I want to keep all whatever transactions happen from the card, gateway, everything to be keep secure on our on premise using Kubernetes GKE on premises version, and I want to have it on our own data center. Okay, and suppose I want to have these microservices hosted on a cluster using a AWS cloud, and this for our GKE on the Google cloud. So now managing this cluster, and this cluster on all on different clouds is like a very tough task for one to establish the entire communication and connection between all of these clouds. Okay, so now with this example you got a bit of idea, like what initially when I said let us build and manage modern multi cloud application means. With Anthos we can manage all the clusters, though they are on different clouds, different, it's like a hybrid model, but we can manage them centralizedly. Okay, so suppose, okay, with this graph, this is a fleet. Now what fleet is in Anthos is a group of cluster, and all these clusters, like these, this cluster, we can group together in a fleet, and there is a requirement that all should have a same namespace. Okay, all these clusters should share a same namespace. Now one is on a Google Cloud, one is on AWS, one is on Azure. Now when I say our cluster, go GKE cluster on AWS, in that case GKE uses all the resources related to AWS cloud, like it can be on EC2 instance, it will use EBS as a storage. Okay, ALB ingress as a load balancer. Okay, so resources will be specific to AWS. In the same way, the resources will be specific to Azure. On the top of that, we have a gateway, gateway service, then VPC, interconnect gateway. Over here means like the exposed services. Exposed services you can consider as a gateway. Okay, on the top of that we have service mesh is there. On the that we have Anthos configuration management. Typing is not going pretty well. Okay, so this is how it looks like. We have a configuration management, service mesh, gateway, VPC, interconnect, and the bottom this is our all the clusters. Okay, so in next topic we will be totally focusing on what exactly service mesh is. Okay, so service mesh, coming on to the service mesh. In Anthos, service mesh is STO, and STO is service mesh. Okay, service STO is one of the open source product that is being used by Google Cloud, and it Google Cloud is managing it, taking all the new releases, doing security testing on it, and it is also providing support on the top of that. Okay, so in STO we have two things. One is a data plane, one is a control plane. Control plane is known as STOD. Before version 1.15, when we install STO, it comes up with like multiple pods. One is pilot is there, mixer is there, and citadel is there. It is a CA. Okay, pilot is there, it is used for routing, like we will be discussing further. For routing, pilot is there, mixer is there. Okay, and database. Now why STO? What STO has done in before, if I talk about very long time back when we were having monolithic applications, so at that time everything was like a one unit, like within this everything was like there my web server, database server, everything. But now when we have moved on to the Kubernetes, we have separated everything as a microservice. Each one can run as an own individual identity regardless of having a dependency. At the backend we can configure a connection between them, but each one can run as an individual entity. Okay, so now there is a big challenge, like for a developer guy who is writing the application code. Like while writing the code, he has to think about the security as well, how this application can be secure, how to establish the connectivity between them. So with STO, what the biggest thing we have achieved, like it has separated both the thing. Like developer is now only responsible for writing the code, you can say code code, and he is not too concerned about how the networking should be, what will be the security. This is something that DevOps will take care of. So it has separated the business logic with our other components. Like there are retries there. Retries concept is there. Suppose if at one try, if my service is not able to establish the connection, then how many retry it can make in order to establish the communication with another service. So retry logic. So all these things now has been separated from the code thing. Okay, so now what happened, now making it more clarity. Suppose this is one of my microservice, or like application code service A, and this is service B. Now in STO, if it has to establish a communication between these two, so regardless of communicating it directly, there is another component proxy. This is envoy proxy. Envoy proxy. So now the communication will happen like service A will pass its communication to proxy. From proxy A, it will go to this proxy. This proxy will intercept the request and it will pass on the request to B. From B, it will come to the proxy, and now the communication will happening between these two proxies. So communication between these two proxies is comes as a part of data plane that I have mentioned you at the top. This is a data plane. And control plane. Control plane, that is STOD, it is responsible like whenever any pod is created, envoy proxy is deployed as a sidecar container inside it. So this is like deploying of these envoy proxy for the communication between services is being done by STOD control plane. Okay, and now when it deploys it, now the envoy, like at the back end, it is using all these pods for this communication, like from how this envoy proxy know about, how this envoy proxy knows about this envoy proxy, which route it has to follow to pass this request. All these things is taken care by pilot. For one service to communicate a secure communication, certificate authority is being taken care by Citadel. Like it is taken care by or generating the certificates and establishing this communication. Okay, so this is how the Anthos and like its component, the communication. So this is like a rough, I'm over here giving you a rough overview what Anthos is, what components we have in Anthos. So we have discussed there's a service mesh is there how in service mesh we have a data plane is there, control plane is there, STO, what the base concept of service mesh is like segregating, like dividing the code part, separating the code part from the network security point. Like only developer has to think about only the code part, you do not have to worry about what network, what security is being in. How does it communicate? Service A has to communicate with it using a proxy. This proxy is deployed within each pod. Like in pod, this proxy is deployed as a container by control plane STOD. STOD over here is a control plane which is responsible for deploying each. So now all the services can communicate with each other. Now one more important thing, now how you can manage centrally all these things. Okay, so in Anthos we have one more component, Anthos configuration management. So now when we have one cluster is there, two clusters, suppose you have three cluster, one you have cluster for dev cluster is there, for prod you have a cluster, for dev staging you have a cluster, and somehow the code, if we know like prod has the highest secure priority, prod is basically which client is using, so somehow these are identical, where like at staging we do a lower level of testing, then dev what is can be a step before the production, how we can do this thing. So all these are quite similar. So with this we can enthuse configuration management, we can we have a GitOps as a like a centralized source code where all the developers can check in their code, and from there all these clusters are managed centrally. So this is a point of source of truth for all these clusters. So rather than deploying everything individually, we can push our code over here, and from here it can centralizedly deployed on all these environments. So in parallel to this, there is a config sync is there for configuration sync. There is a hierarchical policies there. It's where you can manage and everything as in like hierarchy. There can be a hierarchy where you can have a very well defined and in a sequence way. These are the like components within that. There is one more good thing which I missed to tell you in service mesh. One is that in service mesh, while deploying all the, like suppose you in our cluster we are having a version 1, and now we want to do a new release on our cluster. Suppose v2 want to go, so with this we can do a traffic splitting in a way. If I want, if I have on a, suppose of my payment microservice I have to deploy, so I can do a canary deployment with percentage deployment. Like I want only 1% to go to my new version and 90% 99% to the old version. So this can also be done with the canary deployment as a part of service mesh. I hope you guys like my video. For more learning or anthos, you can like subscribe my session.